Good afternoon, YouTube, and welcome to ultimately my first video for 2024. And so I've been wanting to record some content out there, but I've really been waiting and also kind of thinking about what I want to do with the channel. Definitely want to bring more video into the channel, also potentially interviews, kind of some live content, that kind of stuff. So got some things I want to do this year with my channel as I evolve this channel a little bit more. Still staying on focus with automation of big IP using, for example, stuff like the common API AS3, CIS, and now, of course, adding content for big IP next. So there's a lot of really cool stuff coming. Specifically between now and April timeframe, so a lot of new stuff. So I highly recommend subscribe, share the content, and let me know what demos you'd like to see. So I'm recording this before App World, and my goal next week is to actually get some new content, hopefully record some of the folks in the community and kind of share that with you if you're not going to App World. If you are going to App World, please let me know if you'd like to record some content. That would be pretty awesome. As a content creator, as well as part of the community, all of us can remain anonymous. So with today's video, I want to talk about some of the changes coming in Per App API. And so really what's happened here is the promotion or the graduation of Per App API from beta into more of a GA, and actually putting this into a release where it's enabled by default and users can actually start to use it. What we're also going to start to do is almost make it to a point where the behavior is not going to change whether you're using a classic big IP, maybe as a VM, or a big IP next, maybe also as a VM, maybe running on a different piece of hardware. So the kind of usability is going to be very similar between those two subsets. And that's one of the reasons why we want to start talking about what we see here versus what we see there and some of the similarities. We're going to start to get into a little bit more content like that over the up and coming months. Some of the migration stuff, some of what AS3 looks like on Next, etc., etc. So you can start to get some ideas of kind of what's coming down the road in 2024, 2025. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about some of these changes. So if we actually go, we can actually do a simple GET request on the API. This is the info piece on the API. You can actually see I'm actually running version 50, which is the release that we're going to graduate Per App API. And it's really interesting because it's our half century or 50th release of AS3. So I'll do another video for the 50th release, specifically talking about, over the last, say, since 2017, how many GitHub issues have we solved or resolved or closed? How many commits has there been? Because it's kind of interesting to show, but I think that would be kind of nice to kind of talk about with regards to the 50th release. I'm also going to be presenting at App World to talk a little bit about, where and how customers are using AS3. And I will record that and share that with you folks on YouTube as well. I'm actually quite excited that I've just ordered some camera gear. And so I'm going to be using that camera gear next week at App World. And so you guys will be able to see some of that content if you're unable to make it to San Jose, California, the first week of February. So you'll be able to just see it through some of what I'm going to post on this channel. So AS350, the graduation of Per App API, also our half century release. So that's actually kind of cool as well. Both of those kind of put together. So what we're going to do is let's just go ahead and do a simple GET request on the big IP itself to kind of see what's on there. There should be absolutely nothing. It should be a blank big IP with no tenants. So this whole concept of tenant kind of partition is going to be kind of interesting now from the start of this content. And I'd be interested to think and kind of interesting on your thoughts on what you think about this. So I haven't really created a tenant. So I don't really want to start creating tenants as like an application tenant or like one app per tenant. That's kind of gone away with Per App API. think of this as more of like a resource group. Think of it more as like I put a piece of hardware out there and I now make my hardware available to consume apps. And so a tenant really doesn't matter at this point, right? A tenant is kind of an arbitrary fact. And in fact, that's exactly how BigIP Next works. So there's no real concept of tenants. It's more of a stack. It's more of an application or an application stack. And so think of Per App API as the transition to that. And as you can see back, there's really nothing here other than schema version, for example. So what is interesting is if I pull the settings endpoint on this 50th release, what you'll actually see is Per App API is enabled by default. Now, if you're declaring, it doesn't really make any changes. There's absolutely no change. So if you use the declare API, app services declare, doesn't matter. But if you post to a resource group, that's what I'm going to use, to the /applications endpoint, well, then you're using Per App API. If you want to disable Per App API, you can definitely do that. You can go ahead and change the settings of Per App API to simply just make it false. And then, obviously, it will return back an error to say that Per App API is not enabled. That's totally up to you. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is post my initial configuration. And what I'm actually doing is I'm posting my initial configuration to /declare/default. Now, I'm bringing in this concept of default. And default is just a resource group. It's just a default tenant. Think of it as like a default resource, maybe a default namespace, default project, where all of these applications are going to land. They're all going to land up in this resource group of type default. Now, I am declaring specifically to default. By declaring to default, I am not using the Per App API. I'm using the legacy declare endpoint. And so when you declare anything, the same applies. It's a declaration and a declarative-based API push, right? So whatever's in here, your source of truth, is going to be your source of truth. So for example, I am declaring the tenant, right? So right now there is no tenant. So I'm declaring the tenant and it's declare default. So as you can see default, and you can see there is application 1. So think of this as this device is empty. Think of this as maybe some type of pipeline that is running. Maybe this is what I would call my source of truth. Maybe you want to do a get, consolidate all that into Bitbucket or GitHub, and that would become a source of truth. So you could always declare that state back. It would just do a diff. There shouldn't be any changes because all of those apps are posted. So let's go ahead and simply just post this per app. It's a very simple one application to a tenant of default. And so when I actually go ahead and talk about this tenant of default, think of it as just a project, a resource group, and a resource really for these applications. So as you can see, there's my first application, my application A. It's a description of app with a virtual, and it has some pool with 2 pool members. And so that's actually pretty good. Actually, API response time is actually quite reasonable. 15, 14 seconds. I'm completely remote across VPN using my service provider. So I'm not sitting in the office. It's not potentially high speed, but 13 seconds actually pretty good response. Okay, so now that I have posted the initial application, I can then go ahead and if I want, I can get that declaration. So we'll go ahead and do a very simple get of this declaration. You'll see that there's one simple application in here. As you can see right here, there's a simple application. So the next is what I want to do is I want to go ahead and add application B. But when I add application B, I actually don't want to add application B to the full declaration, as in application A, application B. And there's many reasons for this. It depends on your model ultimately, but maybe for simplicity, Per App API will kind of be what I would see as like a new recommended workflow, really between kind of Classic and BigIP Next, where you can actually do this. You can actually go and use this kind of workflow where you just worry about deploying an application and not necessarily worrying about the concept of having to put all of your logic into one JSON file, right? Because having to edit a JSON file and put more stuff in there, the JSON file gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And think about it, when you've got hundreds of apps, this becomes easier, right? So, so really what's happening here is I can kind of scale down, right, to what I would say is the application configuration while still maintaining or still retaining the AS3 format. I think that's the biggest takeaway, right, is that now I'm scaling down the configuration, right, to the per app level, right, to the per application base level with maintaining that format. So the format doesn't change. Nothing changes really. The only difference is that I don't have to include the entire state. And so by going ahead and deploying something like this, you're definitely going to get a faster API response time. We can clearly see that on Classic, and potentially even better API response times on BigIP Next as well. And so as you build this out, you'll start to see my application B, for example, kind of listed underneath. You can always get A and B if you wanted to do a get. So you can kind of see, reasonable times, response times that I'm kind of getting back here, which is actually really, really, really good to see. So application B, I can do the same for application C as well. So what's ultimately happening, it's really allowing AS3 to merge all the changes. So the biggest change here that we've been working on since AS3 43, I believe, when we first started, is saying, hey, AS3, you merge the changes. That's up to you now. As the API endpoint, you go ahead, merge the changes, and you're just allowing me to streamline this. So not only are you allowing me to streamline it, but you're allowing me to use the default resource on BigIP as an option to configure these applications. And I think that's actually really, really, really cool. And so now I've actually just gone ahead and posted C. So we should see a nice update here with example A, B, and C. And so, for example, I can keep on posting these applications. And you can see it's very clear. It's very, very, very clean. Now, this is a new app, but this could also be an update as well to the app, right? So even if it was initially posted with declare, you can actually go and do an update using per app. I think that's the best thing ever. So you can declare the initial state, like maybe when the system comes up, or if you're doing a migration, you declare your entire state through a pipeline, and then you go ahead and make a change on the app level, right? And feel confident that you're only changing that one app. And so all you would do is just add the endpoint applications there. That's it. So it's the tenant name and applications. Of course, these application IDs, these application names have to be unique. And so right now I'm actually just posting my fourth app here to the BigIP, and you will actually see that here. Now let's go ahead and do a GET request for all of our declarations. So we'll go ahead and post this GET to the device. We should be able to see exactly what we're seeing here on the UI with the virtual servers from my virtual A through D. We should be able to see the same thing here. So here we've got application A, application B, application C, and application D. So you can see right here that ultimately there is your source of truth. So if you wanted to move this, migrate this, ultimately here are your 4 applications. But if you wanted to make a change to any of these applications, you could actually change these applications using the Per App API. So for example, like I could simply just go and change a pool member if I wanted to, and I could say 10.1.0. let's say .10, and then make sure that this is well formatted. I could then go ahead and say post this update. So now what I'm doing is I'm just making a change to one of the pools by adding a pool member to one of the applications as part of this default application. And you'll see that in the UI, if I go to pools, go to the first one here. Let's see, where did I make that pool member? I made that pool and I changed it in pool B. You can see pool B right here has 3 members. That's where it was. It was pool B. So pool B has 3 members. You can see there is the 200 OK. Again, similar type of time with regards to a round trip from the API. If I wanted to then go ahead and do a declaration on this, or do a declaration, or of course it will have the update. And so you can go ahead and manipulate that as you kind of need. There is A, there is B, as you can see right there, and then C and D is of course followed. And so that is ultimately really the changes that we've introduced. Now, these are quite big changes with AS350, because I think this is going to allow you to kind of like streamline your workflow with regards to how you've used AS3 in the past. And if you haven't been using AS3 because you don't like the single JSON declaration, then maybe this is an opportunity that allows you to start to use AS3 and start to consume that resource, if you want to call it, group. Because what's really important here is that Per App API will be the new recommended workflow, right? It's going to be the recommended workflow across Classic and Big IP Next. And I want to make that point. So what you kind of see here, kind of moving forward, if you're going to be using Big IP Next, you'll be able to utilize something similar to this. Sure, there's Central Manager, of course, that you'll be able to use as well. But this is from an API perspective. So that is the demo. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Got some great content coming. And if you're attending App World, please let me know so that we can chat. And have a lovely day. Thank you.